Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the South Coast Artist Index. And you know, the way we start off these shows always have our guests introduce themselves and spell their names. So with that out of the way, let's get it done.
Hi, my name's Tammi Meehan. I typically spell my name Tammi, T-A-M-M-I. And then I usually have a J initial as in Jane, J-A-N-E, and Meehan is my last name, M with two E's, H-A-N.
Okay, thanks. Do you get the Tammi with a Y thing a lot?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and since there was a very famous song way back in the 50s,
Tammi
60s?
Wynette, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Anyway, you've been up to some, I was going to say no good. But when you're creating a show, some people may think that, right. it's an experience, isn't it?
Yeah, it has been. Yeah, it's been an experience being in New Bedford like more recently, but then also kind of hitting the ground running a year ago when I moved half-time to Tribeca, New York City. So that's been just a whirlwind. And I've in this past spring, I had multiple shows in March, and then again in May, June, all in like the greater metropolitan area of New York City, Lower East Side. And, a lot of it was just the result of just responding to open calls. I take the train back and forth to New York, 3.5, 4 hours. And so I would just sit there and just send off all these open calls. More recently in June, I was in a show. It was a Works on Paper show. It was curated by Kim Connedy, who since the time of curating the show became the head curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art. So that was kind of great. The opening, which I'd never done anything like this before, there was kind of like a lecture at this opening for an hour, and Kim went through like what they had. What she had created with another curator for the department that she was in for Works on Paper of Ruth Asawa's work. So
what was that again?
Ruth Asawa.
Ruth Asawa.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Mm-hmm. So that was pretty great. And then I decided to take a break from New York for the summertime, of course, because I cannot stay away from the South Coast of Massachusetts in the summertime. And I had applied for a solo show at Groundwork Gallery months ago, like early spring, and I got a show. I didn't realize it could also be a group show. I was supposed to have a solo in, I think it was June, but I had so much going on in June that I decided to ask if I could have a group show instead. They were totally down with it, and we switched it to September from June. And since that time, I invited 6 other artists to be a part of this, and it's just it came together great, and it's been just a joy, just kind of like collaborating and figuring out where things are going. It's hard though too at the same time with a lot of the different aspects that I didn't realize. Just kind of catching up with the marketing and also dealing with illness over the summer with getting COVID again and just the timing of things. But it's been really fun, which was kind of the whole idea behind it, is to have fun and it's a community-based gallery, which I'm very happy about because I really believe in accessibility, and that's actually one of the themes of the show is to have kind of like an art raffle almost, and each artist submit one piece to be given away for free in exchange for creating an email list. So it's not just like we're just giving something away.
It's not just for exposure?
Yeah.
The currency of the realm?
Yeah. Well, that, but also just I think people have this sort of idea about art that it's almost like, it's nice to look at, let's say, in somebody's studio or in a space, and they don't realize that they can actually take it home, put it on the wall, and have their own sort of piece that's, handmade, and it's not like a, poster bought at Home Goods. It's, something that somebody created, thought about, and took time and created. So
there's so many questions I've got. And one of them is, Groundworks it seems as though, I mean, they've had shows before, but it seems as though from what I've seen going by in social media, as I'm scrolling, that they're really digging in, so to speak. More shows, larger shows, better shows, for, bigger, better, whatever. All the great superlatives. And the South Coast, even though we do have the Whalen Museum, not everyone can get in there. The New Bedford Art Museum, not everyone can get in there. There's Cola Cola that's still operating in the South End. There's Gallery X.
There's the Star Gallery too, the Star Store Gallery. That's
the other Star, on William Street. Used to be Gallery 65. Yeah, but there still isn't enough wall space, I don't think, or gallery space.
Absolutely agree. I'm actually kind of in the pipeline, going to be looking at a space and potentially in the really close to downtown, on 6th Street. I'm going to be looking into a space for potential, some kind of a community-based gallery,
Well, that's good news. I mean, when you look at the amount of artists that we have in this city, which still nobody really knows. I think one of the projects that we have to undertake, and I know it's been attempted before, but is a real census to get everybody listed down. And, at one time when they attempted it, a lot of artists were gray market, operating in the gray market. They didn't want to expose themselves for tax liabilities. I'm assuming that's one of the issues. And as you know, trying to get a bunch of artists together to do anything is really like corralling cats.
Yes.
But one of the biggest challenges that I've discovered is that if you're an artist in the South Coast, you are balancing several things all at the same time.
Absolutely.
And you are busy. But my dad always used to say, busy's great, but productive is better. So are we being productive? So back to gallery space, wall space. Why do you think it is that we haven't been able to support galleries? Because when you have imagine we have a fishing fleet that's bringing in all this fish and they can't sell it.
Right. No, yeah, most in the country too. I think that there just needs to be a lot more education. In researching this particular Groundworks gallery is in the Swain School of Design building, which, I just started looking at, and I just think that there's just not maybe enough awareness about the incredible history of this area that is known to actually like local people, even just like about Frederick Douglass or like, let's say, like downtown Fairhaven. There are people who grow up and live in New Bedford that have never been in downtown Fairhaven, haven't seen the Millicent Library, don't know a lot about how important the area is as far as like architecture, the history of this being one of the wealthiest cities per capita in the country, for decades. And, how that influenced us culturally. There are other artists who pay, they know a lot about like their art history and stuff like that. Like, let's say the history of Western art. And there are so many artists, abstract artists, contemporary artists, who were influenced by Albert Pinkham Ryder. Not a lot of people know that, and they don't know that he has roots in New Bedford or even Beardstadt. Beardstadt's family immigrated to New Bedford first. There are a lot of artists and just people, just culturally, that came to New Bedford first. And I think we're very proud people in this area, but I also feel that, culturally, the humanities, there just generally is not enough education in that area.
Still remember at once upon a time I worked for Ray Basalian, or Basalian, as some people pronounce it, who was the superintendent of art for New Bedford Public Schools. And I worked for him under the Comprehensive Employment Training Act, or CETA as it was called back then. And I was also a substitute art instructor, and I was given a position at the old Keith Junior High School. And art was still seen as more of a recreational thing, more than an actual subject. And then there was the horrible thing of the itinerant art teachers. I used to call them the bag ladies because that was the term that was used back then. I mean, women with shopping carts loaded with supplies because they no longer had a home-based room in the schools. Mm-hmm. My experiences living in Portugal were quite different. When people would ask, what do you do? And you say you're an artist, they'd be, excited.
I had the exact same
Where's your work?
Yep.
Have I seen it? This and that. What galleries are you in? Here, and I've said this a million times already on this podcast, oh, yeah, you make any money doing that?
Oh, yeah. I lived in Paris for a year when I was 20.
I already hated you for Tribeca. But.
Right? Yeah, and I was young. I was 20.
Yeah.
I just remember that really stuck out, that when you would tell people in France, I'm an artist, they would say, oh really, who do you like, what artists do you like? And here, because I was college age, and I just remember a good friend, her dad was like, well, what do you really do, like how do you really make money?
Yeah,
big contrast.
Yeah. The other weird life experience that helps try to contain this concept of what is going on here with art education, art knowledge, art appreciation, is when I was teaching at BCC, Bristol Community College, and teaching art history. I taught art history there for 14 years. And the weird thing was that it was a required course. You needed it to matriculate, and the prehistoric to medieval and then the Renaissance course, I forget the sections now, and they've changed everything, so it doesn't matter if I remembered it correctly or not. They would fill because but when the modern art, the Survey of Modern Art section opened up, it had very low enrollment. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would ask, and it'd be like, well, the pyramids and statues, you get these responses, but like, well, what about modern? I don't know nothing about no modern art. Well, that's why you're taking the course. The modern art, quote unquote, scared people intellectually. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There still seems to be this in the political arena, they have the anti-intellectual facet of one side of the aisle. And the thing with art is that there's still this lack of appreciation, perhaps lack of knowledge, lack of immersion.
Absolutely. And I think now it's a lot more about, whose history. Like, we're talking the history of Western art, but whose history is that? I remember, I went to Mass Art in the early 90s, and, I was very much influenced by, my mother was a very strong woman, and she put herself into community college, and then she also went to Mass Art. She graduated in 86. Mm-hmm. As soon as my younger brother was in kindergarten, she put herself through college. But at the time in the early 90s, I had no female artists to really look up to, except save a handful. and it used to really bother me because, I had kind of inherited this resentment. My mother was a woman who was told, graduated 17th in her class, was going to go to Northeastern, was told by my grandfather, no, you're going to get married and have children. So she didn't go to college until later. But there was a paucity of information about female artists. And 85% of the population that was going to mass art at the time was female, and more than half of the monetary awards and grants went to men. So I think that's what's happening now, is this sort of like internal turn, and that it's as if like art criticism almost doesn't exist anymore. It's more of a level playing field, and people are kind of turning inward to like their personal histories and journeys and cultural journeys. And so that's kind of like almost like a segue into understanding better what, quote, modern art is. Modern art is almost like just a period of time, because now in contemporary art, like if you go to New York, in the galleries, you're seeing beautiful tapestries that are woven. You're seeing a lot more of what would be considered crafts being in the in these fine art galleries. And like even Ruth Sawa, you could look at her work as craft, or you could look at her work as this incredible forerunner in more modern art, depending. And I was actually like drawn to tears going to see a show, Judy Chicago show at the New Museum in New York, her story, because it was like, it was this retrospective, this incredible female artist who, was poked fun at in the early 70s, getting certified in pyrotechnics, making these incredible films that I had never seen before or heard about, of like, a naked woman walking through the desert holding up these flames, and it was just an incredible show. But I was moved to tears because 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, she did not receive any of the accolades that she deserved for the quality of her work and for what she was bringing to the fore when it comes to the female experience. So a lot of gender bias, and even going back to the piece about New Bedford, history, I feel a lot of history is how we can see history through the art. Like whether it's like, tapestries from northern France, or the caves in Lascaux, or even the piece that went around, it was at the Kilburn Mill on the top floor.
Oh yeah, the panorama.
Yeah. That was so fascinating, and you learned so much just by looking at this art about our history, about this city's history. You could see, Cape Verde, you could see Portugal, you could see everything and how it works through and interweaves with the culture that's here. Even the Swain School, it was very much about the crafts that were, the industry of the, the masks, or the embroidery, or the everything that came out of here, and the crafts people that came over from France, came down from Canada, came from Portugal. It's just really fascinating.
Well, the Unitarian Church in Fairhaven, I read somewhere some time ago that Henry Huddleston Rogers brought in 600 Italian craftspeople to work on that church. So there was, maybe the average mill worker, but there was an elite that appreciated the art, and I don't know where they are. I mean, I brought the concept of the Detroit Fine and Arts Breakfast Club to the New Bedford Light a couple of years ago. In the 9 years that they were operating, the first 9 years that they were operating, my friend Henry told me that he just kept a very loose tally on a little spiral-bound memo pad. They sold $4 million worth of art in those 9 years. Of course, you can't sell anything unless you have collectors. Now, Detroit happens to be an epicenter of black art collectors who are also African Americans. So, of course, they have a base there, and they had the big four auto plants there. Now, just the big three. And that made a huge difference because there was money there. So this city has gone through these ups and downs, but it brings us back to the fact that we need to have, perhaps, to use that term, outsiders coming in, people who have the wherewithal to come in and start setting up galleries here to showcase local artists. And of course, galleries aren't charities. The only reason that galleries will ever accept your work is because it's a business proposition, because they believe that they can sell your work.
Right.
Okay.
Or it's a pay-to-play. A lot of galleries.
And unfortunately that's happening so much to the point where there are some scams that you can't tell the difference between a legitimate pay-to-play. I mean, I was in Miami a couple of years back, and one of the gallery owners told me that he had no other choice because of what he was being charged per square foot. Then the point is, I guess, what are you doing in the gallery business, and why are you staying here? Even though, oh my God, I'm blanking out. It starts with a W. It's become their like art zone in Miami. I hate that. It's age, I guess.
I think the galleries kind of stay alive just out of pure passion sometimes, and just having that connectedness with other artists, because most galleries have specific artists that they work with. They might like their vision,
There's also another viewpoint, and it can get to be a little dicey verbalizing it, but that there are people of means where it's the husband who has the wherewithal and the wife who has a love for art. So, and we've heard the stories about restaurants where women will open restaurants because the husband is whatever, and so they're the financier of the operation. And there's no simple explanation. The woman in Portland, Maine, who decided, I think she fit that demographic. Her husband they were of means, and she thought Portland needed some art. She started the entire renaissance of Portland, Maine, which spread throughout. I mean, it was like the most bizarre thing.
Maggie Mailer did something similar in Pittsfield.
Yeah. And that's all she did was just open up a gallery, So that's something in of itself.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. That was the storefronts project. So a lot of cities followed suit when it came to that. I mean, that's something to be maybe to think about for New Bedford too. We do have some vacant storefronts. That might be an artist spotlight or something like that downtown. Especially for AHA nights, because that's great exposure for the other business. But I think with the commuter rail is coming. Which has been something that's been a mantra in this area for 35,
I just
40
celebrated
years.
my 72nd birthday, and I have heard that all of my life.
Right. But you can see the changes. You can see the gentrification on Hyperdrive now in this area. And I think that with rents being the way they are, they've gone up. I think I was looking for an apartment in between, in 1 year, I think the rents had gone up in 60% or something like that in New Bedford. But compared to the rest of the state, it's actually really reasonable. So I think more and more people, and also a lot of people are leaving bigger cities like New York.
And getting out of the suburbs, believe it or not. Easy access to smaller urban areas, which were blighted at one time. Main streets, downtowns were suffering tremendously. We can get into the whole historical aspect of the automobile is what caused it. And again, it wasn't like this deep, dark state plot. It just what happens. Look at social media. No one ever really planned or could foresee what social media was going to do, and how it was going to affect so many aspects of life, and especially younger people.
Right, but I think the social media in this case, where the question is posed, what to do about the lack of gallery space or wall space, and I think the answer is the social media and the marketing approach and bringing people together. I think that since the pandemic, there's this sort of like collective need for like seeing people in real life, you know, just having these in person, even like meeting with you instead of over Zoom, doing this
which
where it's face to face.
Which was a godsend, so to speak, and also it lingered along. People got lazy. Okay, I can be in my jammies and talk, you know, and do a podcast, and then I got to the point like, now can we do it live?
Right.
And I was like, okay, so we're just going with that. The other thing too is, in Portugal, I had a couple of openings, and one in Germany. I've never seen passed around hors d'oeuvres and sparkling wine being served at any gallery around here. Maybe I just haven't been invited or fell into the right gallery around here.
Right.
And people dressed up in their Sunday go-to-meeting clothes to go to a gallery.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Yep.
Why?
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. That's something that could happen more around here. But I think post-pandemic, there is more concerns about, you know, the spread of germs and stuff like that. There's just
unfortunately, I came back from Portugal at the end of July after having been a COVID virgin, you know, through this whole thing. And then found out, oh, great, New England is having an uptick in cases, and Massachusetts is a hot spot.
Yep.
And lo and behold, 3-4 days after arrival, boom, I got it.
Yep. I think we got it around the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you were having certain, you know, scheduling issues and so on and so forth, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God.
Well, you know, and that just reminds me, the other piece to this too is artists within this community actually networking, going out. I hadn't been to the South Coast Artists Association. They have the tour. So there's the weekend in July, the weekend in August. So I went, and I went to Eric Lintala's studio, where Bruce Bailey and Eric Lintala, and that's how I learned about the Swain School, being at the Groundworks Gallery, because Eric used to teach at the Swain School prior to UMD, which was, I think it was SMU at the time.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
They had, across from the Carney Academy was their, I think it was a sculpture studio at that time.
Yeah, so just kind of, and that's what I love about, you know, Elemental, is this collaboration with other artists. And I feel I have a responsibility as an artist to go out and just support other artists and show up and just walk around and go to the different gallery shows, which is how, I think that's how you and I met.
Right.
Through like an open studios.
But I remember back in the days of Colo Colo on Center Street, which was still one of the best galleries in town ever. That's a whole other subject matter, personalities and so on and so forth, but still the impact that man made. And then when he moved, was forced to move down to the Kilburn Mill, which at that time I was speaking with Steve Lefkowitz, who was the owner of, he and his brother owned Furniture City, and his brother didn't want any part of it anymore, and Steve was saying, okay, what can we do? I said, well, we need a Hatch Street in the South End. Well, and everybody had that peninsula thought, because a peninsula is a terminal zone. Okay, you can drive into it, and you can't drive any further. You have to turn around and drive out. Who's going to come down here? Well, obviously, you know. So just at the right time, I connected the two, and he got into that space. But the point being is that there would be a certain number of us that would support each other and go to every one of our but there was nobody else.
Yeah.
There was nobody else. And in Detroit, again, okay, it's a larger metro. It's 6 times larger than New Bedford. Shows that open sold out. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. But there's you know, there's a statue, and it's almost a mascot of the city, the spirit of Detroit. It's a real thing. And it goes across the socioeconomic spectrum. And so I think we're not there yet. But going back to your life and experience, living in Paris, living in New York, experiencing the art scenes of 2 major art centers. What do you think? Looking into your crystal ball.
Yeah, no,
Because in order to look forward, you have to go back.
Actually, as you were describing these openings, I was thinking about the fact that, there's definitely this opening culture in New York City where, alcohol is a lure. there's that, but then there's also fashion, and there's so many other aspects to going out to these openings. And a lot of times there's I think it's there's a Lower East Side night. It's a Thursday. I want to say it's like a second Thursday, almost like AHA is here. But just in general, there's not really a comparison, just because in general, just the immense amount of galleries and artists, and it's such a high concentration of galleries. It's just a completely, it's its own culture in itself that is self-supporting in a lot of ways. I think, again, it kind of goes back to like a sense of excitement, a sense of pride, but also just the lore of something free or food, or because and also just this kind of like excitement that happens word of mouth, that I think that would be a cool thing to go see, or maybe even just kind of diversifying what is presented at these shows, like just kind of going back to my experience at the Long Beach Island Institute of Arts and Sciences that Kim Connedy curated, that Works on Paper show. I love the fact that we had this sort of lecture going on for an hour by, a curator from one of the most, a pretty renowned museum for contemporary art. But maybe that's just me, but maybe some kind of offering where we have like the New Bedford Film Festival occurring. I think we had something going on at Hatch Street. I don't remember.
Yeah, they had venues everywhere.
Or even like the New Bedford Light. I know
Right.
that like in 22, I was one of the artists that was a part of, I think it was 10 artists, and then we had another event at there's a gallery in Westport. I can't remember the woman's.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, 5
Dee Dee
people.
Shattuck.
Yes, Dee Dee
yeah.
Shattuck, presentation.
Yeah.
But, even, Hatch Street has this immense space on the second floor that could be turned into some kind of a community gallery. And we've talked a lot about that at Hatch Street. But I hear that there was a small bus where people would be bused on AHA nights up to Hatch.
Right.
I think it was like 2014, 2016, around that time.
And we can go all the way back to Jim Charette when he was part of the squatters, so to speak, at the Kilburn Mills, and really rattled a lot of people by saying, "Well, what about us?" I mean, and at that time, the Kerr Mills wasn't even what it is. The Kerr Mills, that's in Fall River. The Kilburn Mills weren't nothing like. It was only a couple of studios up there. The Bolt Gun Gallery was Jim Charette's, and he's like, what are we, like chopped liver? And do you have to be a fine arts faculty member who can afford a nice studio space? And he really held the mirror up. He really held up the mirror. And then with Luis Villanueva from Colo Colo moving in there, and then that transitioning over to Kilburn, and it was just another spark, another fire. But to use a parallel analogy about gods and goddesses, that there are no gods and goddesses without believers. So there can't be galleries without buyers. I mean, of course, we've got tons and tons of artists that can hang their work.
Right, but I think that this is kind of something that I'm kind of putting out there have been trying to assert, is that there is that accessibility, that art now is so subjective, and there is nothing linear about art anymore, I feel. So like a place like Hatch Street Studios, you've got this diversity. We've got weavers, there's potters, there's carpenters, there's fine artists, there are teachers. I have my counseling practice there. There is a photography studio there, and it's open to the public. So getting the public in, a lot of the people who are buying art are not necessarily this high-end collector. And I think that that's kind of like almost like a misnomer, that a collector has to be. I'm a collector. I trade art. That's how I collect. I love trades. It's like one of my favorite things to do with other artists is to trade. So, the label of being an art collector, I think, it kind of needs to open up a little bit. If you like it, a
collector is a collector. How you got a hold of the work,
right,
well, other than a nefarious.
Right. But if you like an antique, if there's a particular antique you like, you buy it. Right. That's the rule of thumb with if you're going to collect antiques is if you like it.
Right. There was it's funny. I just watched something on YouTube because I don't watch network television, not because I'm a snob. I just don't watch network television, and so I watch YouTube a lot. And there's like a lot of things on YouTube, and there was one expert artist, whatever, who said this linearity in art history is bullshit.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And bullshit in so many different ways because
Jerry
we
Saltz.
learned about. Was it Jerry Saltz?
Yeah, Jerry
he
Saltz,
said,
yeah.
"Why are we going down this line? Well, what about African art? What about Filipino art? What about South American art?
Yeah.
All these tangents. Well, we call them tangents, but and then there's the terminology itself. Contemporary means now.
Right.
Now, contemporary in 1885 was contemporary in 1885.
Right.
Now it's historical.
Well, and I think, too, that just reminds me of a conversation that I had a good 20, 25 years ago. I had gotten this heated argument with this gentleman that was going to Mass Art graduate school at the time, and I was a mere undergrad.
Uh-huh.
But, and it was a very heated argument about, what is art, the hierarchy of art, who decides, and, just this basic idea that, walking down the street, looking in a window and liking the image that you see, that's art, and part of the idea behind the Elemental show is the artists that I chose to work with, many of them.
Could you list them off, by the way? I mean.
Yeah, well, part of my decisions, some of the artists I've had really intense conversations or sort of enlightened conversations about the fact that we view the art making process almost as like a pure channeling, that there is this sort of creative place we go when we're making art, that is this sort of like Zen place where it's almost like we're just the conduit and the art is happening. And that's an idea that I feel it kind of coincides with my counseling practice, where there's sort of this integration.
We're shamans. That's basically what we are.
Yeah, shamans. Yeah. But becoming your own shaman, so processing your own trauma, using that as an opportunity to help you get through stuff or tell your story, and so it's something that we all have access to, basically. We might be seen as the shamans, but at the end of the day, we're all, kind of personal shamans that can make the magic happen for ourselves.
Somebody historic said, without art, the asylums would be full. Totally. I don't remember who said that, but it is actually pretty true, for sure. I think we're the stage is it's been a long haul. If you go back to 1985, for some reason that's I remember being in town in '85, going downtown, and there was nothing. I mean, it was dark. I worked at Freestones. I was forced to go back and do what I did to pay my way through college. Because all the cedar work ended, and there was no other choice. And I used to tell people that Freestones was the only light on downtown. And that was a very brave thing when you stop and think about Debbie Seguin and Kerry Mitchell, what they did. But things take time, and for the longest time, some of the political representatives here, there was this silver bullet mentality. Oh, this is it. This is the thing. No, it's all connected.
Oh yeah. I mean, my background is in addictions. But when I lived here from '04 to '07, I had a studio above No Problemo for a minute.
On the Cushing.
And I was joking
Cummings.
and I was joking with Corey St. Pierre about this. So the studio that I had, that the windows were broken up top, and I would come into my studio and there'd be pigeon poop on my art. And I was like so upset. But, and then the AHA nights were great, but, just not a lot of traffic. And even having a conversation with Hank Gatlin over, we were talking the other day about how much New Bedford has changed in that, you're not seeing, and that's the thing, New Bedford has this reputation for years of being kind of like the final stop for a lot of the addiction facilities.
Right.
And so, for the people who don't kind of get it, that go to WATC, the Women's Addiction Treatment Center, they end up on the streets in New Bedford. And so this is what you would see a lot of for a long time, way back when. I'd love to say way back when, but, and that's was the conversation that Hank and I were having about what it looked like downtown, that it was a kind of an eerie feeling. I can't say I felt 100% unsafe just because of the work that I've done working with people in the mental and like not really having that, like knowing that it's a desperation, that it's not necessarily violence.
It was tough. I mean, I had my my advertising office on Union and Cottage, and if I was going to, I would go to Jimmy's Hot Dogs like nearly every day because of the conversation and camaraderie. And my father would always call me the hot dog kid because that was it. It was hot dogs was the thing. So I would take whatever it was, like say $5, leave my wallet in my office, and walk downtown because it was kind of scary. And sometimes the scariness and the bad vibe is manufactured because there are people who are afraid and they breed more fear, and it's a vicious circle. My stepfather was a fisherman, and I remember going in some of these rough and tumble places with him. And I'm looking at the waterfront now, and it looks very different in so many ways, but a lot of it's the same. And I think it's kind of cool that my advertising agency was the agency of record for the New Bedford Seafood Co-op. And so I dealt with a lot of commercial fishing media. And I remember New England Fishermen, they showed this lobster boat. It was on the front page. This is the last commercial fishing vessel leaving the port of Salem. It got totally gentrified.
Wow,
and look at here in New Bedford. You can go down there. There's the black whale. In fact, the Silversteins pretty much, took up that whole corner without interrupting the industry. And people, it took people a long time to get used to, they thought, oh my God, so they would tiptoe down there and like look around, and I can see the fishing boats. Yeah, nobody's gonna bother you. So this, when you put light on something, it keeps the other elements away. It's very, very visible. So we're on the cusp of something again, and the Vitruvian wave, or some, we learned in our history the Greek key. There's the running Greek key, which looks like a wave, and then there's the geometric Greek key. Okay, and basically what it is that this force is running to a certain point where gravity takes over, and it starts to dip down. It comes into itself, and then it spins out again. It's almost like winding a spring or something, and then it shoots out again for another thing. And I think we are now poised for that, and that's only my opinion.
Yeah, it's funny that you should describe that too, because the show Elemental, it's the second part of the title is the universal flow of life. So it's just, I definitely agree. I agree with this idea of cycles, but also these energetic flows that ebb and it is.
Yeah, it is an ebb and flow. I mean, now the other thing is there's been a lot of people coming from away, as they say in Maine.
Oh yeah.
And that has helped break this thing, because without getting too particular, in the political spectrum right now, there are certain individuals who only receive their news, their opinions, from certain media sources, and they only interact with people that look like them. Mm-hmm. So they don't have this widespread thing. Mm-hmm. The bigger city people, you go to Boston, and for people who've never, come from Western Mass, never been to Boston, mm-hmm. They've lived in and it's not to cast a disparaging thing. They see, oh my God, there's an African, and there's a person from Asia, and there's all these different people. It's a melting pot. Right.
And I think along those similar lines is the fact that like artists too have to be willing to diversify and not be so kind of codependent on galleries being how they get their work out there, and that's completely changed also because it's a much more level playing field. And I think it's like online galleries or direct connection with the artists. The online, at least with online galleries, they've gone up by 35% sales, and that's like directly to the artists, which is fantastic.
And yet art collecting, they've been yammering about this for the past 18 months. The art, if you look at the art market, like the stock market, is crashing.
Yeah.
But there is a glut of work.
Right.
And I've spoken about this before, trying to create the analogy between what the French call the wine lake, mm-hmm. which is all the unused wine, regardless of the quality of the wine. And sometimes that really, really good wine is put into this wine lake, which is really not a real space. It's spread out all over the place. And this is wine that instead of going for consumption, human consumption at the table, goes into making chemicals, vinegars, acetate,
mm-hmm,
that
mm-hmm,
kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The same kind of thing exists, and it's been very difficult to Google because to name it Art Lake, all you keep getting is the former weatherman from Channel 10 in Providence. But it's the same thing. There is this imaginary ocean of floating, not lake, ocean of artwork. Yeah. So much so that when you have an artist who passes, if they've only, I don't know, let's say they're lucky enough to sell 30% of their what the contents of their studio over a span of say 40 years, just for numbers. There's still 70% of that artwork left in their studio,
right? Which
their surviving spouse has to deal with, and the children and anybody else has to deal with that estate. That either goes into a dumpster, sadly, or gets thrown into a bonfire,
or becomes more valuable. People want it because they just passed. It's like,
but that again may
marketability.
be one of those false flags, false or misconception, because it's the Van Gogh boat thing, Mm-hmm. So, which is something that we hope to do here at the Artist Index, is to create some sort of a forum or a colloquial colloquium to discuss these kinds of things, because there's no right and there's no wrong.
And that kind of going back to the diversification piece, like I realized quite a while ago, having had some experiences in Boston at a gallery, and feeling as if I need to kind of like take the power on myself to put my work out there. And so I have a YouTube channel where I have time-lapse videos. I try to stay as active as possible with Instagram, and I network, I reach out, I try to market. But at the end of the day, what I really need to do is to be in the studio and to work. And so I think overall, the artist has actually a kind of difficult job in being, they're, advocating for themselves, but also just actually taking the time, having the time to make the work.
Chief cook and bottle washer is, I gave up on it. I was in marketing for, that was my fallback job from art. And I taught marketing, and my wife said I had to market. She's a graphic designer. She said I had to market myself better. And I said, you don't understand, I cannot do that. It's just like no one can see the end of their own nose. I don't have that distance. I don't have that objectivity, okay? I don't know if it's good, bad, whatever, okay? So there's a lot of baggage already. So it's not that I would dispassionately tell my clients to do something because, I just wanted a paycheck. But I did get involved and invested in their businesses and such, and I could see things they couldn't see. All right? So, and then all this, a bunch of us from the BFA class, SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University, BFA class is 75. We still get together.
That's great.
And we used to joke, 50% of my time was at the easel, and 50% of my time is trying to market the work, social media and such. And then it got to a point where you'd see all the long, stern faces like, well, I'd be lucky if I got 15% at the easel. I mean, all this other, and then it got to a point where I just said, no, not doing it anymore. I'm not doing it anymore.
It does take an element of courage, and also learning new skills, to put the work out there. It's definitely a lot. But at the end of the day, artists are these, we're sensitive souls, and having that downtime and having the alone time and getting into that zen and connecting kind of to your inner beingness, or however you want to describe it, is a really important aspect of being that,
I mean, I want my life to be like it was my 2 years of graduate school, which was basically instruction. And there was some, but I would say 80% of my time at the University of Miami is they gave me all the time I needed over a span of 2 years to do what the hell I wanted, when I wanted to do it. And I produced more work in those 2 years than, it was amazing what I put out. Yeah. And that's the other thing, to be relieved of all these other things. You can't be relieved of your parenthood. You can't be relieved of financial responsibilities. But to be relieved of all these other things and going to that studio, because I would always be where I would hit a key piece of work. I worked it out to the point, and finally there's like, the sound bite from The Simpsons kind of thing. Oh my God, the light's pouring in, and then something throws you off track, and you try to get back on that.
Oh yeah.
And you ain't never going to catch that train again.
And that's what I love about being in New York.
Right.
There's plenty of room for me to work in the loft, and I have exposure. But at the end of the day, I am there for pure and utter escape, and that's it. I wake up in the morning, the art's right there. I'm living and breathing the art, and I'm doing it nonstop, and I'm not distracted by any other aspect of my life. So.
I mean, I'm ADHD. That somebody finally labeled me. It's something, I knew there were things that did not make me like a lot of other people. And now it's like, oh, well, that makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Oh, yeah.
And so I really, the compartmentalizing of things. And I've fought my way through the whole thing, and I've been painting more now, up until my mom's death. It was amazing. I mean, I cranked out 4 or 5 pieces in July alone. And they're not abstract pieces. I mean, I used to, my abstract work, I used to, quote my Alma Cummings' dad. Herb Cummings was one of my favorite instructors at SMU, and it's like it's all perspiration. So I would just bang out. My dream was to get a palette of canvases and just put one on next. Then I started getting into that socially conscious work, and that took a lot more deep diving, so to speak, subconsciously, psychologically, so on and so forth. And then I thought I abandoned one for the other, and now I've got this weird formula where I'll do a social, I'm working on the Ibu landing situation, 1833, where a shipload of Nigerians came in, and there's this myth of the flying Africans, which has always intrigued me. And I've done other of those ilk, and I do family issues that were bad, and issues from history and such. But every other painting I do is an abstract piece, because that helps flush out.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'm seeing some parallels with my personal experience too, in that my mother struggled with ovarian cancer for years, and Last summer was my last summer spending time with her, and I spent a lot of time in the studio, and not as like a, it's a distraction, sure, but I just, there's something to it that's taking the time out and just working with what's right in front of you is so helpful. And then when she did pass, I just kind of hit the ground running in New York in a different sort of like creative situation that was going on. And it's just funny how these sort of outside influences can influence your own process, your art making process.
I can't believe the time went by so fast. We have to start wrapping this up, but there's a couple of things, and it's funny. I am really, really blessed and grateful to, Jeff and I started this Artist Index, and he told me I had to do podcasts, and I was like, oh, I can't, and here I am. I think we've produced over 200 of them now, and I've had the honor to speak to so many artists, and if I have to hear myself thinking, and I have to hear other people's thoughts, and you said something that just, my mother was a father singer, and one of my favorite songs of hers was translated in English, may God forgive me if it's a crime or a sin to love the Father, and to run from the Father was to run away from me. And I just realized that I've always was focusing on her and her singing, but it's so much the same for an artist. You can't run away from it. Mm-hmm. You cannot run away from it. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a crime or a sin or whatever, you've got to do what you got to do.
Even when I was going to grad school and focusing on a counseling profession, that's been kind of 15 years in the works, mm-hmm. I was doing that so that I would be able to support myself as an artist, because I did not feel that that my work would necessarily, it's kind of out there. So I just felt, that it wouldn't be supported so much if I was, I also didn't want any kind of gallery outside influence to affect my work. But I still went to the beach all the time. My favorite thing to do is to watercolor on the beach. I was still doing collages. I was still actively working kind of on the side constantly, just to kind of like keep myself afloat mentally, probably, mostly, but I needed that. I needed to be able to have that in my life, and I could feel it if I wasn't spending enough time painting.
It's balance. So, because we do have to wrap it up, give us some specifics about the show at Groundworks. Title, people involved, dates. It's on now. The gallery itself is open 9 to 2. Where's it located?
The building itself is 9 to 2. It's 1213 Purchase Street, but it's accessible at 1 Maxfield Street. So the show is up until October 17th. Mm-hmm. Opening reception is September 14th from 3 to 5:30 p.m. Mm-hmm. And then it's open both AHA nights. I believe it's like
the next AHA night is the 12th.
Yeah, the 12th of September, and then I think it's the 10th of October. So that would be 5 to 8 p.m. So people from out of town, have a accessibility.
And how many artists? You said 6?
There's a total of 7. So
okay.
It's myself, Michael Hecht, Kirsten Eels, who's a Boston artist, Amy Lund, Christine Mayato Fitzgerald, Amanda J. Moore, and Chris Page.
Okay, excellent. Good cast of characters.
Yep.
And to jump back to your potentially opening up a gallery in downtown New Bedford or near downtown New Bedford.
Yeah, I have to set up a time to look at the space. It's been vacant for a year.
Is that the old telephone exchange building?
No, it's above a friend's restaurant. So
Jordan Shavitz, the old cobblestones.
No. I don't. It's just at a nascent stage. So
right.
I'm not even sure this is all going to come to fruition at all. But it's an exciting prospect. I think the idea was that this is space that could have potentially been office space, but nobody rents offices anymore. Mm-mm. So I just kind of put the idea out there, like, hey, what about an art gallery? And it was actually through the other Star Store gallery that I thought of that, because they were were looking for another space because they were potentially going to be kicked out of the William Street spot. So I thought, it just kind of came to me like, what about this space? And that might be a cool,
Yeah, we need one. I mean, the Ugly Gallery, for example, was I didn't mention them before and just thought of them now, but that was very, very, use the term ballsy, when you consider the kind of art that they offered there. It was street art, as that was referred to back then. And it opened up a whole other universe, and legitimized street art.
And that I actually am thinking too along the lines of inviting other artists from other cities to show, for it to be kind of like community based, but also bring in some sort of some other artists so that there's more awareness of how much of a gem New Bedford is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, fresh blood, so to speak, or new blood, or whatever the old term was for that. Wow. Any parting statements?
Well, I wasn't sure if you wanted to know like how to reach me or any of that.
Oh, that'll all be on our companion blog post, because every podcast has its own blog post, which gives all the contact information, so on and so forth.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool. That's why you have to fill out that horrible form.
So maybe just so I do have a YouTube channel. I have Intuitive Transmissions with my time lapse videos. I think it's really important for young artists and for artists just in general to remember, like, to persevere and to continue to follow your bliss. I was telling your engineer earlier, I just used to be so enthralled by the Bill Moyers interviews of Joseph Campbell, and he was a huge influence on my personal philosophies and, learning about history basically of mankind and myth and the commonalities and the archetypes across.
I used to play him in my art history classes.
Yeah, and I had a little, I ripped out something from a magazine or an article, and it was just follow your bliss. Just on my fridge, so I would, become disheartened or going through whatever I was going through at the time, or feeling like my work was just wanted the work to be seen, and I just was, because the universe does put people in your life as you kind of go along your path.
You have to surrender, and I know that's a term used quite a bit by Christians, denominations, but it really is an Eastern concept, and this letting go. I found out from personal situations where we expend so much negative energy refuting something that is going to happen anyway. Someone is terminal, they're end stage. You can hope for a couple of more days, whatever, but the eventuality is written on the wall.
So against the tide.
The moment you accept it, then the quality of the time you spend with that person completely changes.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm still trying to come to grips with my mom's death. I mean, she was going to be 98 this month, at the end of the month. And it was sudden, and people say, 98, what do you mean it was sudden and unexpected? It's like, no, she was fine. I mean, I've got a photograph of her taken a couple of weeks before. It was just a fluke. She had walking pneumonia. She's always dealt with pneumonia, so on and so forth. But the point being is, all the energy that we misspend, it's misspent energy if we just accept what's going to happen. And I found that in my own practice of painting. I think the reason why I'm doing better is because I've just accepted what it is. And a very wise lady that I live with asked me, do you want to be sustained or do you want to be supported? You can't have both. And my Virgo ADHD brain couldn't wrap itself around that. And then I finally realized that I need the sustenance. The support would be great. And you can't have the support first and then the sustenance come later, because then you're an empty shell. And we've seen so much of that happen, with people where they've become successful. Norman Rockwell, most successful illustrator ever, and was the most miserable human being because he felt he wasn't legitimate. He was just a hack.
Well, and that's what I love about the city is that there's a lot of integrity. You know, you can't really. So some other cities, it's just very surfacey, and people wear a lot of masks. And I think there's a lot of really real, down to earth people.
And it is community with a capital C.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Tammi, Jay, Meehan, thank you so much for joining us. This has been fantastic. I don't know what episode number this is, but we're up there.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, Ron. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
And, the experience of getting you on the show is very similar to you trying to wrestle up 6 artists for your show.
Yep.
With that in mind. Well, folks, thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation, because they're not interviews, they're conversations, and that's all that they are. So remember, be kind to yourself and be nice to other people. Thanks so much. See you next time on the next South Coast Artist Index. Bye-bye.
To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.